The key clinked in my hand, a heavy, cold piece of metal that felt like the last vestige of my old life. It was the original key to the front door of the house on Evergreen Lane, a house I had poured my heart and soul, and every penny, into over the last 30 years. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and at 58 years old I had always believed in family, in generosity, in building a life for those you love. I live in Willow Creek, Oregon, a quiet town where people knew each other, where a handshake still meant something. Or so I thought. This house, this beautiful, sprawling home nestled among the pines, was more than just bricks and mortar to me. It was a testament to my hard work, my dreams, and my unwavering commitment to my wife, Sarah, and by extension, her family. I had always been the provider, the steady hand, the one who fixed things, who paid for things, who made sure everyone was comfortable. My consulting business had done well over the years, allowing me a comfortable retirement and the ability to indulge in my passions, like tending my garden or restoring vintage radios. I prided myself on my patience, my ability to see the good in people, and my willingness to always lend a helping hand. This was a trait my in-laws, Miriam and Richard, had learned to exploit with a refined artistry. Miriam, Sarah's mother, was a woman of perpetual delicate health when it suited her, and a force of nature when there was something to gain. Richard, her husband, was a blustering man, perpetually on the verge of his next big, doomed business venture, always needing just a little more capital to make it soar. For years, I had been their financial lifeline, a bottomless well of support. I paid for Miriam's supposed medical emergencies that always turned out to be minor ailments requiring expensive spa treatments. I bailaid Richard out of several disastrous investments, including a pet rock revival and a high-end artisanal popsicle stand that lasted 3 weeks. I even put their youngest daughter, Brenda, through a very expensive art school, only for her to drop out after a year to pursue a career as a lifestyle influencer, which mostly involved taking selfies with expensive lattes. My generosity knew few bounds, largely because Sarah, my dear Sarah, would always implore me with tears in her eyes to help her family. "They're all I have, Arthur," she'd say, her voice soft, her eyes full of pleading. "They just need a little boost, a little help to get back on their feet." And I, being a man deeply in love, a man who believed in the sanctity of family, always gave it. I bought them a new car when theirs mysteriously broke down just before a planned road trip. I paid off their mounting credit card debts. I let them stay at our house for extended periods, sometimes for months at a time, when their own small apartment proved too stressful or uninspiring. I often found myself retreating to my study, seeking solace among my books and my radio projects, while Miriam redecorated the living room to better reflect her aesthetic, and Richard used my tools to tinker with his latest invention, invariably leaving them scattered and sometimes broken. Sarah, bless her heart, always seemed oblivious to the subtle shifts, the slow creeping entitlement that had begun to consume her parents. She saw it as family closeness, a bond that only grew stronger with our help. I, however, saw the subtle glint in Miriam's eyes when she talked about the potential of my garden for her herbal remedies, or Richard's casual remarks about how much maintenance a house this size needed, almost as if he were already mentally taking notes for himself. But I dismissed these thoughts. They were family. They were Sarah's family, and I loved Sarah more than anything. I truly believed with every fiber of my being that they loved us back in their own complicated way. They were just a little needy, a little demanding, but surely their hearts were in the right place. That naive belief, that deep-seated trust would be my undoing, or so they thought. But it was also the fuel for the quiet storm brewing inside me, the storm that was about to break in a way they could never, ever have imagined. How could I have been so blind for so long? The day the world tilted on its axis for me began like any other Tuesday. I had a doctor's appointment for my annual checkup. Nothing serious, just routine. I told Sarah I'd be gone most of the morning, probably grab a coffee afterwards, maybe pick up some new gardening tools. I was actually planning on a leisurely drive to a nursery a bit further out, a place that specialized in antique rose varieties. I even kissed Sarah goodbye, a light peck on her cheek as she hummed in the kitchen, preparing what she called her healing herbal infusion for Miriam, who was, predictably, suffering from a sudden bout of existential fatigue. I left the house with a smile, the morning sun warming my face as I got into my car. My appointment finished earlier than expected. Dr. Miller gave me a clean bill of health, joked about my low blood pressure being a testament to my calm demeanor, a calm demeanor that was about to be shattered into a million pieces. Instead of heading straight to the nursery, I decided to surprise Sarah. I knew she loved the artisanal sourdough from the bakery downtown, and I thought I'd pick up a fresh loaf to go with lunch. As I drove back, a pleasant tune playing softly on the radio, my mind was on my roses, on the quiet afternoon I hoped to spend in my garden. I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. I noticed Miriam's car was there, which wasn't unusual. She often came over for her treatments or just to chat with Sarah. What was unusual was the low murmur of voices coming from inside, even before I opened the front door. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. The voices were hushed, conspiratorial. Curiosity, a rare emotion for me in my own home, pricked at me. I pushed the door open silently, hoping to surprise them, a small, innocent thought. But the surprise, it turned out, was all mine. The voices were coming from the living room where Sarah and her parents were gathered. Miriam was perched on my antique velvet armchair, gesturing dramatically. Richard was pacing, a smug look on his face. And Sarah, my sweet Sarah, was sitting on the sofa, looking. Not upset, not concerned, but rather excited, almost giddy. My blood ran cold, an icy dread creeping into my veins. "It's perfect," Miriam was saying, her voice a stage whisper that still carried. "Arthur will never suspect a thing. He's so predictable, bless his heart. Always so focused on his little projects, his little garden. He doesn't see what's right in front of him." Richard chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Right. The old fool wouldn't know a hostile takeover if it bit him. He just keeps handing us money, thinking we're grateful." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. What were they talking about? Hostile takeover. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Then Sarah spoke, and her words were a dagger twisting deep into my soul. "He really does think we love him unconditionally, doesn't he?" she said, and there was a note of disdain, of amusement in her voice that I had never, ever heard before. "But he's just so useful. All these years paying for everything. It's time we finally got what we deserve for all the sacrifices we've made dealing with his eccentricities." Miriam leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Exactly. And once we're here permanently, he won't have a leg to stand on. We'll simply tell him we're moving in for his own good, of course. To help him. And then, once he's settled into that little cottage we found for him, we'll gradually, gently, ease him out completely. He won't even realize he's being kicked out until it's too late. The house is big enough for us to make it our own. We can sell off all his boring old furniture, those dreadful radios. And that garden. I've always wanted a proper herb garden, not those overgrown monstrosities he keeps." Richard clapped his hands together, a sound like a gunshot in my ears. "And the best part is, he won't fight us. He's too much of a gentleman, too much of a pushover. He'll just accept it like he always does. We'll have this place lock, stock, and barrel." My body felt numb, frozen in place. The sourdough baguette slipped from my fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a soft thud. It was a small sound, but in the sudden silence that fell in the living room, it might as well have been a cannonball. 3 pairs of eyes snapped towards me. Sarah's face, usually so gentle, contorted into a mask of pure terror. Miriam's jaw dropped, her elaborate charade of delicate health instantly forgotten. Richard's smug grin vanished, replaced by a ghastly pallor. For a long, agonizing moment no one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the stench of betrayal. My vision blurred, tears stinging my eyes, not of sadness, but of a searing, white-hot rage I had never known I possessed. My wife, my family, the people I had given everything to, had not only planned to steal my home, but to discard me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. They had played me for a fool, a walking ATM, for years. The pain was excruciating, a physical blow to my chest. But through the shock, through the hurt, a cold, hard clarity began to form. They thought I was a pushover. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought they had won. They were terribly, terribly wrong. And in that moment, standing in my own entryway, holding the forgotten sourdough, I decided that I would play along. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. And when the curtain fell, it would be on their shattered dreams, not mine. The game, I realized with a chilling calm, had just begun. The silence in the living room stretched, suffocating and heavy after the baguette hit the floor. Sarah was the first to react, her face crumpling. "Arthur, you're home early," she stammered, scrambling to her feet, a false smile plastered over her trembling lips. Miriam, ever the actress, quickly regained her composure, though her eyes still darted nervously. "Darling, what a surprise. We were just discussing plans for Brenda's birthday. A surprise party, you know." Richard cleared his throat, adjusting his tie, trying to look nonchalant. "Yes, yes, Brenda's turning. An age, big milestone, secret stuff, old boy." I simply stared at them, my face, I imagine, a mask of bewildered hurt. I made sure my eyes lingered on Sarah's, allowing my pain to show, letting her see the raw wound they had inflicted. I needed them to believe I had only caught fragments, misinterpreted their words perhaps, that I was confused but ultimately still the naive, trusting Arthur they knew. My voice, when it came, was surprisingly steady, though I could feel a tremor deep within my chest. "Brenda's birthday, that's nice," I said, my gaze sweeping over the three of them. "I thought I heard something about a takeover and moving in." Miriam laughed, a brittle, forced sound. "Oh, Arthur, you must have misheard. Richard was talking about taking over the planning for Brenda's party. You know how he likes to be in charge. And moving in was just us saying we'd move into the guest room for a few days to help with the preparations." Sarah rushed forward, trying to take my hand, but I instinctively pulled back. "Yes, darling, exactly. You know how loud we can get when we're planning big things. You probably just heard bits and pieces. Don't look so sad, my love. We'd never do anything to hurt you." The words were a bitter poison, but I forced myself to nod slowly, to let a flicker of relief cross my face, a carefully constructed illusion. "Oh, right, of course. My mistake. My ears must be playing tricks on me these days. I suppose I'm getting old." I even managed a weak, self-deprecating smile. Inside, however, a steel door had slammed shut. The old Arthur, the one who forgave easily, who always gave the benefit of the doubt, was gone. In his place was a man forged in the crucible of betrayal, a man who would meticulously plan his retribution. I watched them, their faces still showing lingering traces of fear and guilt, now slowly replaced by relief, believing they had successfully pulled off their deception. They thought I had bought it. Good. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. The next few weeks were a surreal performance, an elaborate play in which I was the lead actor, feigning ignorance while observing every move my unwitting co-stars made. Miriam and Richard became even more frequent visitors, staying for longer periods, ostensibly to help Sarah with household projects or menu planning for Brenda's non-existent birthday party. I noticed them measuring rooms, discussing paint swatches, and even openly talking about which of my antique radios they would sell first. Richard even had the audacity to ask me for investment advice for a future property acquisition, winking conspiratorially, clearly referencing my own house. I would nod, offer vague, unhelpful suggestions, and pretend to be engrossed in my books or my garden. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to walk on eggshells around me. She tried to be overly affectionate, bringing me tea in my study, asking about my day, but her eyes held a new, uneasy flicker. I could see the guilt, but also, disturbingly, the resolve. She was in this with them. The realization was a constant, dull ache in my chest, a wound that festered. I knew I couldn't just lash out. That would be messy, emotional, and frankly, too easy for them to manipulate. No, my revenge had to be elegant, precise, and utterly undeniable. It had to be a silent, devastating blow that would leave them with nothing but the dust of their shattered greed. My first move was subtle but critical. I needed to ensure my financial security. I had always been good with money, my business success proof of that. Most of my assets were in various investment accounts and trusts, but the main operating accounts, those linked to the house and joint expenses, were still accessible. Over the next few days, under the guise of estate planning, a perfectly believable excuse for a man my age, I met with my longtime financial advisor, Mr. Davies. "Just tidying things up, Michael," I said, a calm smile on my face. "Making sure everything's in order for the future, you know." Michael, a discreet and trustworthy man, listened patiently as I instructed him to transfer all significant liquid assets from joint accounts into accounts solely in my name, or into an irrevocable trust for my future. I kept just enough in the joint accounts to avoid suspicion, enough for them to believe I still had substantial accessible funds. I also quietly changed the beneficiaries on all my life insurance policies, removing Sarah and replacing her with a distant cousin I hadn't seen in years, and a few charities I supported. This wasn't about spite, but about protecting what was mine and ensuring my legacy wouldn't fall into greedy hands. Next came the legal aspect, the foundation of my plan. I called my solicitor, Mr. Sterling, a sharp, no-nonsense property lawyer. "Edward," I began, my voice calm and collected, "I need to discuss some property matters, highly confidential, of course." We met in his office, a quiet space filled with leather-bound books. I laid out the situation, not revealing the betrayal but framing it as a hypothetical scenario. If, hypothetically speaking, I were to lease my primary residence to a tenant, say, for a short term with immediate occupancy, and then sell it shortly after, what would be the legal process? And what if, hypothetically, certain individuals believed they had a claim to that property or were planning to move in without my consent? Edward, a man who had seen it all, raised an eyebrow. He understood the unspoken nuances. He explained the legalities of property ownership in Oregon, the importance of deeds, and the clear rights of a sole owner. We discussed options: a short-term lease agreement, a power of attorney for property management, and even the potential for legal action if squatters were involved. He assured me that as the sole owner on the deed, my rights were absolute. I smiled internally. The house was, and always had been, solely in my name. I had bought it years before I met Sarah, and though we had lived there together, she had never been on the title. It was a detail I was profoundly grateful for now. I instructed him to draft a robust short-term lease agreement, ensuring all my rights were protected, and to prepare for a swift eviction if necessary, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. The next, and most crucial, part of my plan involved a stranger. My former colleague, a retired university professor named Dr. Evelyn Reed, had recently mentioned she was looking for a temporary place to stay. She was working on a research project at the local library and needed a quiet, furnished home for a few months. Evelyn was a woman of impeccable character, trustworthy and discreet. I called her. "Evelyn," I said, "I have an unusual proposition for you." I explained the situation, or at least a carefully edited version of it. I told her I needed to be away for a few months, tending to an urgent family matter out of state, and needed a reliable house sitter, someone who would treat my home with respect. I offered her a generous rental agreement, significantly below market rate, on the condition that she move in immediately and not discuss her living situation with anyone, particularly anyone who might come to the house claiming to be family. Evelyn, sensing the underlying tension but respecting my privacy, agreed. She was thrilled to have a quiet place to work. We signed the lease, all legal and proper, and I gave her a set of brand new keys. The night before my in-laws were scheduled to move in, a date they had helpfully confirmed to Sarah, who then casually mentioned it to me. Believing I was still ignorant, I took action. Under the cover of darkness, with my wife snoring softly upstairs, I systematically changed every single lock on every exterior door and window of my house. I was no stranger to home improvement. I had always enjoyed working with my hands. I had purchased high-security locks, replacing the old ones with modern, unpickable cylinders. It took hours, working silently, my heart a cold, steady drum against my ribs. Each click of a new lock falling into place was a small victory, a quiet affirmation of my resolve. I even changed the code on the garage door opener. I collected the old keys, the ones they thought would give them access to my life, and put them in a small velvet pouch, a keepsake, perhaps, of a foolish man and a bitter lesson. While I worked, I could hear Miriam and Richard, who had once again arrived a few days early, snoring loudly in the guest bedroom. They had already started moving some of their smaller belongings into the garage, boxes filled with their tacky ornaments and worn-out kitchenware. I saw them, meticulously labeled with their names, sitting there like a declaration of war. I simply moved them to a corner out of the way. I wasn't going to touch their things. I wanted them to see them just where they left them, as a silent mockery of their grand plans. The next morning I feigned a sudden urgent business trip. "Something came up, darling," I told Sarah, putting on my most apologetic face. "I need to fly out this morning. I'm so sorry, I'll miss your parents' big move-in." She looked visibly relieved, though she tried to mask it with feigned disappointment. "Oh, Arthur, that's a shame. But duty calls, I suppose. We'll manage." I kissed her goodbye, a hollow gesture, and drove away, not to the airport but to a small motel a few towns over where I could wait and watch. I wanted to be close enough to witness the fireworks, but far enough to remain unseen, a ghost in my own narrative. The final piece of the puzzle was in place. Dr. Reed had moved in the previous afternoon, her few boxes already unpacked. She understood her role perfectly, to simply be there, to be the rightful occupant. She had her own keys, her own lease, and a firm understanding that she was not to engage in any arguments, just state the facts. The stage was set. The trap was ready to snap shut. And I, the supposed pushover, the old fool, was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. My calm anger, honed over weeks of silent suffering, was about to find its magnificent, devastating release. I sat in my motel room, sipping lukewarm coffee, and waited. The quiet satisfaction that hummed through me was a feeling I had never known. It was both exhilarating and profoundly sad. But above all, it was just. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect day for a reckoning. From my vantage point across the street, tucked away in my car, shielded by the tinted windows and the shade of an old oak tree, I watched. The street was quiet, the usual Tuesday morning bustle. Then, precisely at 10 o'clock, a large moving truck rumbled down Evergreen Lane, pulling up directly in front of my house. Behind it, Miriam's slightly dented sedan followed, Sarah at the wheel, her parents beaming in the passenger seats. My heart, which had been beating a steady rhythm of anticipation, now pounded with a furious, exhilarating drum. This was it, the moment of truth. They emerged from the car, full of boisterous laughter and confident chatter. Richard, ever the dramatic one, even struck a pose, hands on his hips, surveying my beautiful home as if it were his newly conquered kingdom. Miriam, dressed in what I could only describe as her commanding matriarch outfit, a bright fuchsia pantsuit that practically screamed "I'm in charge now," held a small, ornate box. Inside, I knew, were their most prized possessions, probably some cheap trinkets they considered valuable. Sarah, looking a little more subdued but still carrying a triumphant glint in her eyes, walked towards the front door. She had her own set of keys, an old spare I had given her years ago. She fumbled with them, trying to select the right one, her movements a little too eager. She inserted the key into the lock. She turned it, and then nothing. The lock didn't budge. Confusion flickered across her face, quickly followed by a frown. She tried again, jiggling the key, turning it harder. "That's odd," she muttered, her voice carrying faintly even across the street. "Did Arthur change the locks without telling me?" Richard, ever impatient, strode up to the door. "Nonsense, Sarah. Arthur wouldn't do anything without consulting you. You're his wife. You must be using the wrong key." He snatched the key from her hand and tried it himself with more force. Still nothing. His brow furrowed. "HMPH, stubborn lock, must be jammed." Miriam, now joining them, peered at the keyhole. "Well, that's not the keyhole I remember. It looks different." Her voice had a nervous edge. The moving men, who had started to unload a large sofa, paused, looking expectantly at the unfolding drama. Richard, growing increasingly flustered, started banging on the door. "Arthur, open up. It's your in-laws. We're here." He didn't know I was there, watching his performance, every single desperate bang echoing in my satisfied ears. Then a new sound, the quiet click of the new lock, and the door slowly opened. Standing in the doorway was Dr. Evelyn Reed, my tenant. She was a composed, elegant woman in her early 60s, wearing simple spectacles and holding a steaming mug of tea. She looked at them with a calm, quizzical expression. Miriam's jaw dropped. Richard froze mid-bang. Sarah gasped a small, choked sound. "Can I help you?" Evelyn asked, her voice polite but firm. "We're not expecting visitors today." Richard, sputtering, finally found his voice. Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow, a picture of serene authority. "Your house? I believe you're mistaken, sir. This is my residence. I signed a lease agreement with Mr. Arthur Pendleton, the owner, last week. I've been living here since yesterday." The words hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. Miriam's face went from pale to a ghastly green. "A lease agreement? That's impossible. This is our son-in-law's house. We're moving in today." She practically shrieked the last words, her fuchsia outfit seeming to pulsate with her outrage. Sarah, tears welling in her eyes, stumbled forward. "No, Evelyn, please, what are you talking about? This is our home. Arthur wouldn't do this." Evelyn took a calm sip of her tea. "I assure you, madam, the lease is entirely legitimate. Mr. Pendleton informed me he would be away for an extended period and needed a reliable tenant. I have all the paperwork right here if you'd like to see it." She gestured vaguely towards the interior of the house. Richard, regaining some of his bluster, puffed out his chest. "This is a trick, a scam. We're calling the police. This house belongs to Arthur and we are his family. We have every right to be here." Just then I decided it was time for my grand entrance. I calmly stepped out from behind the oak tree, walking with a deliberate, slow pace across the lawn. My hands were in my pockets, a faint, knowing smile playing on my lips. My presence instantly drew their eyes and the air crackled with their escalating panic. "No need to call the police, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, clear and surprisingly gentle. "I'm right here." All three of their heads snapped towards me, their faces a symphony of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Sarah's tears turned into a sob. Miriam let out a small, strangled sound, clutching her chest. Richard's face turned a deep, alarming shade of purple. "Arthur!" Sarah cried, rushing towards me, her hands outstretched as if to embrace me. But I held up a hand, a quiet barrier between us. "No, Sarah, please, don't touch me." My gaze was steady, unwavering, meeting each of theirs in turn. "Evelyn here is absolutely correct. She is my new tenant. She has a legitimate lease agreement signed and notarized, granting her full and exclusive occupancy of this house for the next 6 months." Richard finally found his voice, a strangled croak. "6 months? Arthur, what are you talking about? We're moving in, you know our plans." I chuckled softly, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, I know your plans, Richard. Believe me, I know them all too well. I know about the hostile takeover, about kicking the old fool out, about selling off my boring old furniture and my dreadful radios. I know about your plans for my garden, Miriam. And I know, Sarah, about your disdain for my eccentricities and your eagerness to finally get what you deserve." The color drained from their faces, leaving them ghostly white. Miriam stumbled backward, leaning against the moving truck for support. Richard looked as if he was about to have a stroke. Sarah stood frozen, her hands still extended, her eyes wide with terror, the full weight of her betrayal crushing down on her. "You heard us," Miriam whispered, her voice barely audible. "You heard everything. Every single despicable word," I confirmed, my voice still calm but with an underlying current of steel. "And that's why last night I changed all the locks, and this morning Evelyn moved in. You see, this house, this property you coveted so greedily, is legally mine and mine alone. It always has been. And now it is leased to someone who actually respects it and me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet pouch. I opened it and the old keys clinked together. "These are the keys you thought would give you ownership. They are utterly useless now. As for all your belongings in the moving truck and those boxes you left in my garage," I gestured to the back of the truck, then towards the garage, "I suggest you have them returned to wherever they came from. You have no claim here, not anymore." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by a strangled sob from Sarah. The moving men, clearly uncomfortable, slowly began to lower the sofa back onto the truck. The tableau was complete. 3 figures, stripped bare of their arrogance and their greed, standing exposed and humiliated on the doorstep of the home they had tried to steal. Their shock, their absolute, utter devastation was the most exquisite revenge I could ever have imagined. It was better than any shouted argument, any physical confrontation. It was the silent, elegant justice they so richly deserved. Their world, built on my generosity and their deceit, had just crumbled around them. And I, the old fool, watched it all with a profound, quiet satisfaction. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Richard, his face still a mottled purple, began to shout, his voice cracking with rage and impotence. "This is insane. You can't do this, Arthur. We're family. This is our home." Miriam, recovering from her initial shock, began to wail, a truly theatrical performance complete with dramatic hand-wringing. "Oh, the cruelty, my poor heart. Arthur, how could you be so heartless to your own family?" Sarah, however, remained strangely silent. Her face was a canvas of pure devastation, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she wasn't looking at her parents. She was looking at me, a silent plea in her eyes that spoke volumes of her sudden, dawning comprehension of what she had lost. "Family," I repeated, my voice devoid of emotion. "You ceased to be my family the moment I heard your whispers of hostile takeover and kicking the old fool out. You revealed yourselves for what you truly are, greedy, conniving parasites who saw me as nothing more than a source of endless supply. This house is my sanctuary, a place I built with my own hands and dreams. It was never your home, Miriam. It was never your kingdom, Richard. And Sarah," my voice softened slightly as I looked at her, "you, my dear wife, chose to betray the very foundation of our marriage for the fleeting promise of material gain alongside your parents." I turned my attention back to the distraught couple. "As for doing this, Richard, I can and I have. This is my property, legally and unequivocally. Dr. Reed has a valid lease. Any attempt to force entry will be met with legal action and a call to the sheriff. I suggest you instruct your movers to pack up everything, including the boxes you left in my garage, and find somewhere else to go." The moving crew, clearly wanting no part of the escalating drama, quickly and efficiently reloaded all the furniture onto the truck. Richard attempted to argue, to plead, even to threaten, but Evelyn, standing calmly in the doorway, simply held up her signed lease agreement and my solicitor's contact information. "I'm afraid you have no legal standing here, sir," she stated plainly. "Any further disturbance will be considered harassment." Miriam's wails turned into sobs of genuine despair as she realized the finality of the situation. Their dreams of opulent living, of selling off my cherished possessions, of ruling my roost, were dissolving into nothingness right before their eyes. I watched them for a few more minutes, a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow swirling within me. The satisfaction came from the justice being served, the sorrow from the absolute demolition of what I thought was my family. Finally, I turned to Sarah, who had not moved. Her face was tear-streaked, her shoulders slumped. "Sarah," I said, my voice quiet, "I'm initiating divorce proceedings. I've already spoken with my lawyer. You'll receive the papers by the end of the week." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "Divorce? Arthur, no, please don't do this. I love you. They twisted my arm. They manipulated me." Her pleas were desperate but hollow. I had seen her excitement that day in the living room, heard the disdain in her voice. There was no twisting, only complicity. "The betrayal goes too deep, Sarah," I replied, my gaze unyielding. "You knew what they were planning. You were a willing participant. The trust is shattered beyond repair. There is no going back from this." I handed her a single key, not to the house but to our shared safety deposit box. "There are some items in there that are solely yours, family heirlooms from your side. Retrieve them. I'll arrange for your personal belongings to be moved out of the house into a storage unit at my expense. After that, we'll communicate through our respective lawyers." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, a lone, broken figure on the curb. I didn't look back. I got into my car, the quiet hum of the engine, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. As I drove away, I saw in my rearview mirror Miriam and Richard huddled together, the movers driving off with their pathetic collection of belongings. Sarah was still standing where I had left her, a statue of regret and loss. My life, as I knew it, was over. But a new one, a life of peace and self-respect, was just beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal meetings, paperwork, and difficult conversations. The divorce was messy, as expected, but with all my assets secured and documented, and the clear evidence of Sarah's complicity in her parents' scheme, the legal proceedings were straightforward. She tried to claim emotional distress, tried to paint me as a cruel and unforgiving husband, but her arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence and my consistent financial support over the years. She eventually settled for a modest alimony, far less than she had anticipated, and certainly not enough to fund her parents' extravagant lifestyle. Miriam and Richard, left without their source of income, quickly found themselves in dire straits. Their apartment lease was up, and with no savings and a history of defaulted payments, they struggled to find new housing. They tried to appeal to Brenda, their influencer daughter, but her brand couldn't handle the scandal of destitute parents, and she quickly distanced herself. They ended up living in a series of cheap motels, their grand ambitions reduced to squalid reality. The karma, I reflected, was swift and absolute. As for me, I eventually sold the house on Evergreen Lane. It held too many memories, too much of the bitter past. Evelyn finished her research project and found a more permanent home, wishing me well. I moved to a smaller, cozier cottage overlooking the Willamette River, a place I had always admired, surrounded by nature and peace. I focused on my hobbies, on my garden, on rediscovering the simple joys of life. I reconnected with old friends, traveled, and even started a small charity for retired engineers, channeling my generosity towards those who truly deserved it. The wound of betrayal healed slowly but surely, leaving behind a scar that served as a constant reminder but no longer caused pain. I learned a profound lesson about loyalty, about the true cost of generosity, and about the importance of protecting oneself, even from those you love. Sometimes I would sit on my porch, watching the river flow by, and remember that crisp morning on Evergreen Lane. I would remember the look on their faces, the dawning horror, the crumbling of their world. It wasn't a malicious memory, but a quiet validation. They had sowed greed and they had reaped ruin. And I, Arthur Pendleton, the quiet, underestimated man, had simply ensured that justice in its most elegant and undeniable form was served. The silence after all the chaos was truly golden, and in that silence I found my peace, a peace I had unknowingly fought for and finally won. That peace, however, wasn't an immediate, sudden flash of light. It was a slow, deliberate bloom, like the antique roses I so cherished, each petal unfolding with its own quiet struggle and eventual triumph. The initial days were a strange mixture of emotional whiplash, a profound sorrow for what was lost, intertwined with a fierce, almost primal satisfaction for the justice served. The echoes of Sarah's desperate pleas, of Miriam's theatrical wails, and Richard's blustering threats still resonated in the quiet confines of my motel room, but they no longer held power over me. They were merely ghosts of a painful past, fading with each passing hour. I knew the divorce proceedings would be arduous. Sarah, I suspected, would not go quietly. She had, after all, been so deeply entrenched in the illusion of effortless entitlement, a belief system fostered by her parents and unwittingly supported by my own unending generosity. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, a man whose calm demeanor belied a formidable legal mind, had assured me of my strong position. He had meticulously documented every financial transaction, every gift, every bailout, painting a clear picture of my generosity and their exploitation. He also had the recording I had discreetly made of my in-laws' planning session, a contingency I had wisely prepared after their initial betrayal. It was a chilling testament to their malice and Sarah's complicity. The revelation of the recording, I knew, would be the final, crushing blow, not just to their legal claims, but to Sarah's last vestiges of self-deception. When Mr. Sterling presented the evidence to Sarah's lawyer, the shift was palpable. Her initial aggressive demands for a substantial settlement, based on the assumption of a long, loving marriage and her sacrifices, quickly crumbled. The audio file, undeniable proof of her active participation in the scheme to defraud and discard me, left no room for interpretation. It revealed her true heart, not the sweet, pleading woman I had loved, but a calculating accomplice. Her lawyer, a young woman who looked visibly uncomfortable, advised Sarah to settle quickly and quietly. The alternative, a public airing of the recording in court, would not only destroy her reputation in our small town, but would severely diminish any chance of a favorable outcome. Sarah, bless her heart, had underestimated my capacity for methodical planning, just as her parents had. She truly believed I was merely a gentle, absent-minded fool, easily swayed by a tearful plea. But the man who stood before her in those mediated sessions was not the Arthur she thought she knew. This Arthur was tempered steel, refined by betrayal, resolute in his pursuit of truth and justice. The settlement was indeed modest, as I had intended. She received an alimony amount that was sufficient for her basic needs, enough to maintain a humble existence, but nowhere near the lavish lifestyle she had envisioned for herself in my home. There was no lump sum for investments, no extravagant monthly stipend to fuel her parents' parasitic habits. It was a clear, unambiguous statement. You get what you truly deserve, nothing more, nothing less. My attorney made sure to itemize every penny I had spent on her family over the years, not for recovery, but to illustrate the depth of my past generosity contrasted with their avarice. It served as a cold, hard accounting of their endless demands. Sarah signed the papers, her hand trembling, her eyes red and swollen, but there was no apology, no genuine remorse. Only a profound sense of self-pity and what I perceived as lingering resentment. She never looked at me with the tender affection I had once adored, but with a vacant stare, as if I were a stranger or perhaps a ghost of her ruined future. And in a way I was. The old Arthur was gone, and the new one was an unyielding force of consequence. While the legal battles raged, the ripples of my actions spread through Willow Creek. Miriam and Richard, once so accustomed to their comfortable existence at my expense, quickly found themselves adrift. Their temporary living arrangement in one of those cheap motels I mentioned quickly devolved into a series of frantic, increasingly desperate calls to anyone who would listen. They tried to leverage their supposed connections, their delicate health and Richard's imminent breakthroughs. But with my financial lifeline severed, their charm and influence evaporated. People who had once tolerated their dramatics and grand promises now saw them for what they truly were, freeloaders with no genuine means of support. The gossip, swift and merciless in a small town, was not on their side. Whispers of their attempted takeover spread like wildfire, painting them as the villains they truly were. I never actively contributed to the rumor mill. My actions spoke for themselves, and the truth, once exposed, needed no embellishment. The irony was not lost on me. For years, they had meticulously crafted a narrative of their own importance, their own victimhood, relying on my silence and my love for Sarah to protect their image. Now, their carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. They became pariahs, not just financially, but socially. Even the local coffee shop, where Miriam once held court with her elaborate stories, now seemed to find her presence unwelcome. Richard's grandiose schemes, once met with feigned interest, were now openly mocked. Their world, once subsidized by my blind affection, was utterly barren. Then there was Brenda. Her reaction was a particularly stark demonstration of the depths of their dysfunction. When her parents, now truly destitute, appealed to her, her initial response was a series of carefully crafted social media posts about toxic energy and setting boundaries for personal growth. She spoke vaguely of difficult family dynamics and the importance of self-care when confronted with negativity. It was a thinly veiled public rejection of her own parents, wrapped in the saccharine language of modern self-help. Her brand, as she called it, depended on an image of effortless success and positive vibes. Destitute, dramatic parents begging for money did not fit that narrative. She even unfollowed them on social media, a symbolic gesture in her world, effectively erasing them from her curated reality. The irony that her expensive art school education, paid for by me, had led to this shallow, self-serving existence was a bitter pill. But it also proved my point. Their entire family unit was built on a foundation of self-interest, with no true loyalty or love beyond what could be gained. Her abandonment, though painful for Miriam and Richard, was a logical extension of the values they had instilled. They had created a monster of superficiality, and now it was turning on them. Their appeals to me, through various intermediaries, became more desperate. They tried guilt, then anger, then a pathetic attempt at reconciliation, all framed around their dire circumstances. "Arthur, how can you let Sarah's mother suffer like this?" Miriam's sister, a woman I barely knew, once called me, her voice dripping with manufactured indignation. "They have nowhere to go. You're a wealthy man, you owe them." I simply listened, my resolve unshaken. "I owe them nothing," I stated calmly. "They revealed their true intentions and I acted accordingly. My generosity ended the moment their betrayal began." I hung up the phone, a heavy sense of finality settling over me. The bridges were burned, the lessons learned, and the consequences for them were irreversible. After the divorce was finalized, and the last of Sarah's belongings were removed from the house, a surprisingly small collection, given how much space she always seemed to occupy, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The house on Evergreen Lane, however beautiful, had become a mausoleum of broken dreams. Every room, every corner held a memory, a ghost of a life that was built on a lie. The living room, where I had overheard their betrayal, no longer felt like a sanctuary but a stage for a cruel play. The kitchen, where Sarah had hummed while preparing healing herbal infusions for Miriam, now tasted like ashes. Even my beloved garden, once a source of solace, reminded me of Miriam's plans to turn it into her herb garden, her dismissive remarks about my overgrown monstrosities. So, as painful as it was, I made the decision to sell it. Mr. Sterling handled the sale, ensuring a fair price, and the process was mercifully swift. The new owners, a young family with bright, hopeful eyes, promised to cherish it, to fill it with new laughter and genuine love. Watching them move in, seeing their joy, brought me a quiet sense of closure. The house, at last, would be truly loved by people who deserved its warmth. My own new home was a stark contrast to the sprawling grandeur of Evergreen Lane. The cottage overlooking the Willamette River was indeed smaller, but it was perfect. Nestled among towering evergreens with a porch that offered breathtaking views of the river's gentle flow, it was a haven of tranquility. It was humble, unassuming, and entirely mine, built with honesty and integrity, not with borrowed dreams or stolen affections. Here, surrounded by the quiet whispers of nature, I began to truly heal. I spent my days tending a new, smaller garden, cultivating native plants and focusing on the indigenous beauty of Oregon. The smell of rich earth and blooming flowers was a balm to my soul, a tangible connection to life and growth. My vintage radios, which I had carefully transported to my new study, once again became a source of joy. I spent hours meticulously restoring them, bringing forgotten voices and melodies back to life. Each polished knob, each rewired circuit, was a metaphor for my own life, carefully dismantled, examined, and painstakingly put back together, stronger and more resilient than before. I reconnected with old friends, men and women I had inadvertently neglected during the years I spent pouring all my energy into Sarah and her family. We shared meals, played chess, and embarked on long, leisurely hikes along the riverbanks. Their genuine camaraderie, their laughter, and their unwavering support were a stark reminder of what true friendship felt like, a bond unburdened by expectation or transactional greed. It was refreshing, liberating, to be seen and valued for who I was, not for what I could provide. One particular friend, an old engineering colleague named David, encouraged me to channel my passion for helping others into a more deserving cause. It was his idea that led me to establish a small charity for retired engineers, providing grants for their passion projects, offering mentorship to younger generations, and ensuring they had access to resources for a comfortable and dignified retirement. It was a way to give back, to truly make a difference, to nurture genuine talent and selfless dedication, rather than enabling entitlement. The satisfaction derived from seeing these brilliant minds flourish, from knowing my contributions were fostering true innovation and community, was immeasurable. It was a profound contrast to the bottomless pit of my in-laws' demands, a testament to the fact that generosity, when directed towards worthy recipients, could be a powerful force for good. As the seasons turned and the river flowed ever onward, my peace deepened. It wasn't a peace born of forgetfulness, but of acceptance. The scar of betrayal remained, a faint but indelible mark on my heart. It served as a constant reminder of the lessons learned, a guardian against future naivete. I understood now that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or property, but in self-respect, in the integrity of one's actions, and in the genuine connections forged with others. The emptiness I once felt, the void that my generosity had tried to fill, was replaced by a quiet fullness, a sense of purpose and contentment. I often sat on my porch, watching the sun dip below the western hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The river below me murmured its ancient song, a soothing lullaby that spoke of enduring change and timeless cycles. I would think of Miriam and Richard, living their days in squalor, their once grand aspirations reduced to the bitter taste of reality. Their constant bickering, their blame games, and their desperate pleas to anyone who would listen were a morbid testament to the seeds of greed they had sown. I heard snippets of their continued downfall, how they had burned through what few contacts they had left, how their delicate health had become genuine ailment from stress and poverty, how Richard's next big venture now involved collecting discarded aluminum cans. It was a sad, pathetic end, but it was an end they had meticulously crafted for themselves. And Sarah, I sometimes wondered about her. Her alimony, though modest, should have been enough for her to find a small apartment to rebuild a quiet life. But without her parents' influence, without my steady hand, I suspected she floundered. She was a woman who had never truly learned independence, always relying on others to define her existence. The thought brought me not anger but a profound melancholy. She was a victim of her own choices, and of the toxic environment her parents had created. My decision to divorce her, to sever that tie completely, was not one made lightly, but out of a deep understanding that our marriage, once so cherished, had become a cage of deceit. There was no going back, no mending what had been so fundamentally broken. The love I once felt had been extinguished by the cold light of her complicity, replaced by a quiet resignation. I had found my own path forward, free from the burdens of their manipulation. My life was simpler, quieter, but infinitely richer. The cottage was my sanctuary, the river my companion, and the new friendships and charitable endeavors provided a renewed sense of meaning. I no longer sought to please, only to be true to myself. My story, Arthur Pendleton's story, became a testament to resilience, to the quiet power of an underestimated man. They had underestimated my intellect, my resolve, and my capacity for strategic action. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for passivity, and in doing so they had paved the way for their own undoing. I had given them every opportunity, every chance to be better, to be family. But they had chosen greed, and I, in turn, had chosen justice. The silence on my porch was no longer deafening, no longer filled with the echoes of betrayal. It was a comforting silence, a profound peace that settled deep within my bones. It was the sound of a life reclaimed, a spirit healed, and a future finally truly my own. And in that quiet, sun-drenched silence, I knew with absolute certainty that I had won, not with anger or malice, but with the quiet, devastating power of truth and consequence. The key to my old life, that heavy, cold piece of metal, was long gone, discarded along with the bitter memories. The keys to my new life, however, were held firmly in my own hand, opening doors to a future I had truly earned, a future of peace, purpose, and self-respect. My tale, a quiet chronicle of betrayal and its elegant aftermath, served as a personal reminder. Never underestimate the quiet man, for his stillness might just be the calm before a perfectly orchestrated storm. My tale, a quiet chronicle of betrayal and its elegant aftermath, served as a personal reminder. Never underestimate the quiet man, for his stillness might just be the calm before a perfectly orchestrated storm. That storm, once unleashed, did not simply rage and then dissipate. It reshaped my entire world, clearing away the debris of deceit and making space for a peace more profound than any I had known. It was not a peace born of forgetting, for the scars remained, but one forged in the fires of self-respect and earned freedom. The quiet hum of the river outside my cottage became the soundtrack to this new existence, a constant, gentle reminder that life, like water, always finds its way forward, carving new paths when old ones become stagnant or polluted. I spent many hours on my porch, watching the light dance on the currents, realizing that the greatest power often lies in quiet persistence, in the unwavering flow towards one's truth. The initial days of liberation were intoxicating, a heady mix of triumph and a deep, unexpected sadness for the love that was lost. But with each sunrise over the Willamette, the sadness receded, replaced by a growing sense of calm authority over my own destiny. I no longer carried the invisible weight of their expectations, their endless demands, or the constant, gnawing anxiety of their next financial emergency. My generosity, once a bottomless well they had casually plundered, was now a carefully managed resource, directed towards true need and genuine purpose. The charity for retired engineers flourished, becoming a source of immense pride. I saw the sparkle in the eyes of my peers when their innovative ideas, once shelved due to lack of funds, were brought to life. There was Mr. Henderson, who developed a low-cost, high-efficiency water filtration system for rural communities, a project I funded with immense satisfaction. There was Dr. Anya Sharma, who, with our support, built a mentorship program connecting seasoned engineers with young, aspiring students, igniting a passion for science in a new generation. These were the true beneficiaries of my resources, people whose contributions enriched the world, rather than merely consuming its bounty. The contrast was stark and deeply fulfilling. In Willow Creek, the murmurs surrounding my abrupt divorce and the dramatic eviction of Miriam and Richard eventually died down, replaced by a quiet respect. People in our small town, who had always observed the dynamics of my household, now understood. The whispers shifted from speculation to admiration for my quiet strength, for standing up for myself after so many years of perceived passivity. It was a subtle but powerful shift. Neighbors, who had previously offered only polite pleasantries, now sought out my company, sharing stories, genuinely valuing my opinions. I found myself reconnecting with the fabric of my community in a way I never had before, unburdened by the pretense and constant performance of my previous life. These were authentic connections, free from the shadow of ulterior motives. Even when I encountered old acquaintances who cautiously inquired about Sarah or her parents, my calm, straightforward responses, devoid of anger or bitterness, merely stating the facts of their choices and the resulting consequences, often ended the conversation with a nod of understanding or even quiet solidarity. They saw the peaceful man I had become, and the contrast to the chaotic downfall of the others spoke volumes. Meanwhile, the karma for Miriam and Richard continued its relentless grind. I heard snippets through the grapevine, not from seeking it out, but simply as a testament to how utterly their lives had unraveled. Their constant bickering, once a theatrical performance for my benefit, had become their bitter reality. The small, cheap motels they shuffled between became increasingly squalid as their financial options dwindled. Richard's next big venture indeed evolved into the pathetic pursuit of discarded aluminum cans, a cruel irony for a man who once dreamt of high-end artisanal popsicle stands. His bluster had deflated, replaced by a haggard desperation, his clothes perpetually rumpled, his eyes haunted by the ghost of lost grandeur. Miriam's delicate health was no longer an act. The stress and genuine lack of resources had taken their toll. Her once vibrant fuchsia pantsuits were replaced by drab, worn garments, her dramatic wails now tinged with genuine despair, no longer earning her the sympathy she once commanded. Their calls to former acquaintances, once brimming with self-pity and thinly veiled demands, were now met with polite but firm rejections. The well of their social capital had run dry, just as their financial one had. They were truly alone, adrift in a world they had always believed owed them everything. Their daughter, Brenda, the lifestyle influencer, remained steadfast in her carefully curated digital bubble. Her social media posts continued to exude an aura of effortless joy and carefully filtered perfection. When news of her parents' increasingly dire situation threatened to puncture her illusion, she merely intensified her narrative of positive vibes only and the necessity of cutting ties with negative energy. It was a chilling display of the very narcissism her parents had nurtured, a self-absorption that now left them abandoned. I occasionally saw her posts, inadvertently, through shared connections, and felt a pang not of anger, but of a quiet pity. Her life, though outwardly glamorous, seemed as hollow and superficial as the expensive lattes she perpetually posed with. She had gained a fleeting online following but lost the anchors of family, however flawed, that she once had. Her brand was her prison and she was its willing inmate. Sarah, my former wife, was the one who weighed most heavily on my mind at times, though not with bitterness. Her alimony, though modest, truly was enough for her to live a quiet, independent life. I had ensured that. Yet, what I observed through distant reports was a profound inability to adapt. Without her parents to enable her, and without my financial buffer, she seemed lost. She drifted through a series of temporary jobs, unable to hold on to one for long, still expecting things to be handed to her, still dreaming of the lavish life she believed she deserved. She clung to a fragile sense of victimhood, unable to acknowledge her own complicity, her own choices. Her initial shock had faded into a lingering resentment, not at her parents, but at me, for not being the easily manipulated Arthur she had depended on. It was a profound sadness, realizing that the woman I had loved had been so thoroughly consumed by the toxicity of her family, losing herself in their schemes and ultimately in her own inability to forge an authentic path. Our paths never crossed directly, and for that I was grateful. The healing required a complete severance, a clear delineation between the past and the present. The memories, once sharp daggers, softened into cautionary tales. I had learned that love, however deep, cannot survive a fundamental breach of trust, that true generosity requires discernment, and that some bonds, no matter how sacred, must be broken for one's own preservation. The quiet cottage with its river views and its honest, unadorned beauty became more than just a house. It was a testament to resilience, a physical manifestation of my reclaimed peace. Every morning I would walk through my smaller, more manageable garden, feeling the rich soil beneath my bare feet, breathing in the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. These plants, chosen for their hardiness and natural beauty, reflected the man I had become, strong, rooted, and thriving in their own authentic space. My vintage radios, each one lovingly restored, filled my study with the crackle and warmth of bygone eras, a comforting presence that reminded me of simpler times, of the enduring power of craftsmanship and patience. They were a metaphor for my own life, meticulously reassembled and retuned, now resonating with a clearer, truer frequency. The quiet hours I spent with my old friends, sharing laughter and genuine conversation, were priceless. Their camaraderie was a stark contrast to the transactional relationships of my past, a pure and unburdened connection that nourished my soul. We spoke of life, of literature, of the changing world, and sometimes, with a knowing glance, of the profound lessons learned. It was in these moments, surrounded by authentic connection and genuine purpose, that the silence truly became golden. It was not an empty silence, but one filled with the richness of a life truly lived, on my own terms, with integrity and grace. I had, in the end, given them exactly what they deserved, not through vengeful fury, but through the calm, undeniable application of truth and law. Their greed had led to their ruin, and my quiet resolve had led to my liberation. The key to my old life, that symbol of endless giving and silent suffering, was indeed long gone, buried under the rubble of their shattered illusions. But the keys to my new life, to this serene cottage, to my revitalized purpose, and to my hard-won peace, were held firmly in my own hand, opening doors to a future I had truly earned, a future boundless in its quiet contentment. Arthur Pendleton, the once underestimated man, had not just survived the storm. I had orchestrated its precise, devastating conclusion, and then walked into the sun-drenched calm, forever changed, forever free. The profound peace that now permeated every fiber of my being was not merely the absence of conflict. It was the vibrant, undeniable presence of self-respect, a constant, gentle hum that affirmed, this quiet, unassuming life was my greatest victory. And I wouldn't trade it for all the gold or all the false affection in the world.